The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, greetings, family, and welcome to another episode with our good friend, Chris S., who is on the line with me right now. Chris, we are in like part 3 of part 2 of this AA service structure thing. And it's been very interesting. We've had a special guest on the last couple of weeks, and kind of bring us up to speed here, buddy.
Sure. You know, these articles here, this is from June of 1955. What he's doing is he's giving us almost a history of the experience that they've had with the central office, with Alcoholics Anonymous itself. He's been talking about the challenges and about the work that had to happen from New York, just in the management of and the being helpful to all the other groups, and the experience that they've had from that, and a lot of this we've pretty much known about, but for him to like list it out in this particular article, it's fascinating to me. This is 1955. I'm not even born yet.
Right.
Come on, thinking back, just how big AA had gotten by 1955.
Yeah.
There was wheelbarrow loads of mail every single day that they had to answer by 1955. So anyway, what the heck? Let's get going.
Okay.
We're at the bottom of page 157 at the language of the heart. To maintain all these ever-lengthening service lifelines, the office had to go on expanding. In 1950, we moved to 141 East 44th Street, still close to Grand Central. Today, it has the do-it-now Henry G. as a part-time manager, and the 5 fine staff members, Helen, Lib, Marion, Eve, and Ann, have been seen and heard by thousands on speaking trips, often requested by large regional meetings. On its service staff, 12 non-alcoholics, sparked by Grace and Dennis, looked after the office routines of bookkeeping, filing, and stenography. The enthusiastic receptionist, Dolores, presides over the outer office. There, the visitor sees the walls covered with sectional maps showing the worldwide stretch of our fellowship. On a table stands a winged victory, symbol of the noted Lasker Award given to AA by the American Public Health Association in 1951. The editorial offices of the Grapevine are on the same floor. Here, volunteer editors, headed by Don G., meet with a full-time managing editor, Louise, and her assistant, Sarah, to hit the monthly deadline. Further downtown, where rents are cheaper, there is a large floor space where Kitty and her staff look after the Grapevine's 30,000 subscribers and their needs, as well as their complaints. I wonder if there's 30,000 subscribers right now, Monty. It'd be interesting to know what the current subscription rate is, It's probably not as popular per capita as it was in 1955. 3 blocks away from the main office, We have a good-sized loft space where all our shipping and mailing is done. 6 busy young lads do nothing but this. Last year, they shipped about 40,000 books.
Wow.
1955, 40,000 books. Hundreds of thousands of pamphlets, many of these newly designed and brought out. They mailed about 30,000 letters and bulletins and did huge quantities of mimeographing. Like our 3 other offices, this place has the best of modern equipment and needs it. I never really thought about it before,
right.
but for all the publishing and all the mailing and like how do you print up all the pamphlets? How do you distribute all the books? You have to have multiple places to be able to warehouses and things like that.
I chuckled at the modern equipment statement because back then it was considered that way. But I'm thinking back when I was in school and even junior high or middle school, and I volunteered to run off copies or something for the teacher. You had to go down to the office of that big drum with the aluminum thing on it, and you'd spin that thing. It had that blue.
The ditto machine.
The ditto machine. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And now everything's digital and, the blink of an eye.
I don't know about you, but I used to snort I used to huff the ditto.
Did you really?
Yeah. I was a bad kid.
And explains
anyway, down one side of the long packing room, there are shelves reaching to the ceiling. On these can be found, boxed up, tons of the old files of our headquarters, going clear back to the old days at Versey Street. The whole world story of AA is hidden in these boxes, waiting only to be dug out. In fact, we have just begun this 2-year job. In a partitioned-off corner office near those files, I now have 2 tireless assistants, Ed and Nell, researching the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope the day will come when I shall be able to write it. In any case, it is now sure that the story of AA can never become distorted. Such is our newest vital service. I want to talk about these archives as such, right?
Mm-hmm.
The book that was published a couple of years ago, The Writing of the Big Book by Bill Stauberg. I'm probably not pronouncing his last name right, but it's pretty close. Anyway, fascinating book. Expertly done. True historical. Expertise, right? He's really a researcher, and he was able to get a hold of all of these things. Now, if you and I went to New York and we said, "Hey, we'd like to look through the boxes from 1948 to like 1945," no way, no way, right? And I can kind of understand that they don't want this stuff destroyed or stolen or misplaced or whatever, right? But a few people have had free reign with these archives, and especially Bill Shagberg. And I highly recommend the book, The Writing of the Big Book. He found out so much, and it had to be from these boxes that Bill is talking about here.
Wow.
Money-wise, our present array of services may look like big business to some, but when we think of the size and reach of AA today, this isn't true at all. In 1940, for example, we had 1 paid worker to every 1,000 AAs. In 1947, 1 paid worker to every 3,000 AAs. Today, 1 paid headquarters worker serves 6,000 AAs. It is therefore seems sure that we shall never be burdened with a bureaucratic and expensive service setup. Here's another illustration of how really small physically and financially our headquarters and world operation is. Bill is making this a point because in his traditions, in what he called our public relation policies prior to being called to traditions, he made sure that AA is to have the least possible organization possible. That became one of our guiding principles. And then 5 minutes later,
exploded.
You got to have warehouses and 25 people working for you, So he's very careful how he languages this. An AA friend of mine owns a garage, filling station, and a small car agency in a suburban town. His building is 100 feet long and 50 feet wide, about the same total floor space that we have at headquarters. His showroom holds only 2 cars for exhibit. His mechanics do repairs out back, and in front stand 4 gas pumps. This is hardly big business. I know what he's doing here. It's not working. Anyway, yet my friend tells me that on car sales, repairs, gas, and oil, his business takes in and pays out more money yearly than AA's whole world headquarters, the AA Grapevine, AA Publishing, and the AA General Service Office all put together. Therefore, our headquarters is hardly big business either. My friend's garage serves a small community, but AA headquarters serves 150,000 members and nearly 6,000 groups. So by 1955, they were counting about 150,000 members.
Wow.
And these services, well maintained, will continue to make the difference between sickness and health, even life or death, to uncounted alcoholics and their families who haven't yet found AA. So let's now have an end to all that talk of big expense and big business at the New York headquarters. I have a feeling he was still getting some criticism from places we won't mention.
So, Chris, I wonder, back then, how were they counting membership? Was it by subscriptions, book sales, or were they actually taking attendance?
I have a feeling that groups were registering. I don't know this for a fact, but I believe that groups were registering with General Service, especially when they were sending money. And censuses have been traditional in the past. In other words, every home group gets a census.
Yeah.
How many members do you have, whatever. I haven't seen one of them in a long time. It's not because... It may not be because they're not still doing them. I just haven't seen them show up at any groups I've been at. But they're going to be as accurate as the information going in. You know what
Sure.
I mean? And I'm not really sure they're going to be able to get it down to a science. They probably get an accurate appraisal of a general amount of membership. But when I first showed up here, it was 2 million, and I don't think it's moved from that in 30 years.
I remember being in different service positions, filling out forms and so forth. And I remember registering new groups, but I don't remember ever being asked how many people were in attendance on an average or otherwise.
I remember one census from about 1992. Really is the last one I remember the group announcing that we have to do this. There's probably a lot of GSRs that, don't get that material, just fill it out and send it in and don't make it a part of the group's business.
Sure.
But like in 1992, one time I remember the GSR saying, "Hey, everybody, let's stay after. There's some business we got to do, blah, blah, blah." And one of the things was a census. So when we first opened for business at Versey Street, $1 per member per year was required to do the overall job. But at that time, $1 was $1. Today, $1 is only 50 cents. If AA's present membership actually sent us $1 a piece every year, we would still have enough funds to run our headquarters in spite of the watered dollar. He's saying the dollar's been watered down in 1955.
Yeah.
Imagine it today.
Wow.
And we could pay all our expenses of the General Service Conference besides, but we still have to ask our contributing groups to give $2 per member per year, for the distressing reason that only about half of AA's groups give their world headquarters any support whatever. In fact, group voluntary contributions have fully paid office expenses in only 5 years out of the last 15. That headquarters reserve of book money has had to foot the 10 deficits. We have grown so fast that the average member has lost touch and does not understand how his world headquarters and what it does. So I deeply hope that this picture of mine, plus the great work the conference delegates and committee members are now doing, will be graphic enough to arouse in non-contributors a continuing desire to help. Indeed, I'm certain that it will. So let's just go over the numbers. I know that AA has a prudent reserve of about $20 million. And that prudent reserve is like 8 months worth of operating expenses. So extrapolate that out. Let's just say $26 million is the operating funds needed to run Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm spitballing, but it's somewhere near there. And there's 2 million members. All right. That means that each member needs to give $13 every year to be able to fully fund Alcoholics Anonymous through its own contributions. But I know that we still fall far short many, many years, and book money is still what they use to make up the difference. So, what happened in the Zoom era, Monty, was a lot of people started to directly contribute straight to the General Service Conference because they made it Venmoable,
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people would do that with their dollar every meeting, right? And I don't know if the money's gone up or it's gone down, in this post-COVID period of time. But I know that they can always make up the difference with literature sales.
Sure.
Until 1951, our headquarters was constantly overhung with an even greater threat to its existence. While this danger still loomed, and if the problem it posed wasn't solved, our whole world service structure might someday wind up in complete collapse. That danger was this. During our infancy and adolescence, the Board of Trustees, all friends of Dr. Bob's and mine, had been entirely responsible for the conduct of AA's services which had accounted for at least half the size of Alcoholics Anonymous and for much of its unity. As early as 1945, some of us felt that our virtually unknown Board of Trustees had to be securely linked to AA. None but a trifling fraction of our membership even knew who these trustees were. And that's still true today, unfortunately. The main linkage of headquarters to the movement was through Dr. Bob and me, and we were perishable. The Board of Trustees had become an isolated island in the middle of a fellowship sprawled through 52 countries and all in New York City, I might add. Hence, we began to debate the desirability of some sort of an advisory board of AAs. Or maybe we needed a conference of larger numbers elected by AA itself, people who would inspect headquarters yearly, a body to whom the trustees could become responsible, a guiding conscience of our whole world effort. Now, I know just a little bit about this because of some amazing people that have shared this information with me. They were delegates and board members and such, right? Bill had to fight to get the alcoholics in charge of all this. You have to understand the majority of the board when it was put together were non-alcoholics.
Right.
They were Dr. Leonard Strong, and the Rockefeller people, right? And Bill saw that for us really to be sustainable, the alcoholics had to become responsible for their own organization. And it was not an easy maneuver for Bill to pull off. I don't know if he's going to talk about this in the last two paragraphs here, but let's see.
Yeah.
But the objections to this were persistent, and nothing happened for several years. Okay.
There you go.
Such a venture, it was said, would be expensive. And worse still, it might plunge AA into disruptive political activity when conference delegates were elected. These objections had considerable merit. Therefore, the whole project hung fire until about 1948. But by this time, group contributions nowhere near supported the growing AA office. The Grapevine was losing $1,000 a month, and voluntary contributions for office expenses were in the frightening arrears of $2,000 a month. Then Dr. Bob fell ill, mortally ill. Finally, in 1950, spurred on by the relentless logic of the situation, the trustees authorized Dr. Bob and me to devise the plan with which this booklet deals. It was a plan for a general service conference of AA, a plan by which our society could assume full and permanent responsibility for the conduct of its most vital affairs. And about a month ago, Monty, we read an article that Bill was just coming back from this
Mm-hmm.
and was psyched.
Right.
It was a really, really good conference. And what's exciting about all this stuff is we're seeing AA grow up. We're seeing
Yeah.
this society grow up and put together the processes, the people, and the procedures that were going to be required for it to survive decade after decade after decade.
And that's one of the reasons I love doing these podcasts with you, because where people might not normally go out and buy a book like this, right? With the onslaught of technology and the way people are attached to their portable devices and such, now people have an opportunity to dig into the history. And like with this broadcast every week, people get to watch AA, the birth, the toddler stage, the adolescent stage, and into adulthood, and where the founders actually are preparing for their next level of eternity and leaving it
Yes.
to the members. It's fascinating stuff, and I think, and you've heard me say it a ton of times, this rich history, I think people don't know what they don't know. And once they know, though, I don't see how they can't be intrigued by it. I'm amazed as we've been reading through this book. And one of the things that I'm amazed at, and I wanted to bring this up tonight, you've heard me talk before that I've seen kind of the direction that our nation's going, and I've seen AA kind of follow that same path to some degree. But the flip side of that is, in the midst of some pretty wild going-ons in our country, you can still go to an AA meeting and leave all that crap at the door. And that is amazing to me.
It really is. And there's only very, very minor exceptions.
Yeah.
Like one of my sponsees was just talking about, he went into a meeting and somebody was wearing a Make America Great red hat, in the meeting.
Yeah.
And people reacted to that, not whether they were Republican or not. They reacted to that like that's almost a breach of etiquette. We do try to leave that stuff at the door.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I think there's a maturity and a humility that gets developed by people, and we're all in the same lifeboat, aren't we, Monty?
Right.
Yeah. Who wants to fight with the people in the lifeboat?
Exactly. It's amazing to me how, I've had political disagreements with people during the smoke break. I've had discussions over coffee after a meeting, and something would come up where my good friend and I disagreed very strongly, but I'm pouring his coffee and he's pouring my coffee every week. And it's never an issue.
And if he called you for help, would you be there in a heartbeat?
In a heartbeat.
Right,
It would not even be a question, And I think that's one of the marvelous gifts of how God works in this fellowship. I don't think we can behave that well left to our own devices. I think we need providence. I really do. And I think he's there. He's there guiding and directing us. One of the things that I had a really difficult time with early on in my journey was that phrase, trust the process. I had a sponsor who used to tell me that. And because I'd get all up in arms about something, because when I jumped in the beginning, and I'm memorizing these traditions, and by God, if this group isn't following them, I'm going to let you know, and all that kind of stuff. Right. And he'd say, Monty, you got to calm down. Just trust the process. And I'm like, what do you mean trust the process? I have to help the process along. He goes, no, you don't. You really don't. Just trust it. And what he was saying was, you got a big God, trust God. And he was so right. And now I understand how come this guy could be so calm. all the time, in the meetings. People were having a fit during the business meeting. I remember when that whole phase went from smoking to non-smoking,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
that
my
was big.
gosh, that was great. But it's so funny, isn't it, Chris? I mean, I hear so many people say so often when there's drama, they're like, why do we have to have drama? And then when they come to the meeting and they hear there was drama at a meeting that they missed, they go, why do I always miss the drama? It's like we're never pleased. But we stay in fellowship and in healthy fellowship with each other. And when the stuff hits the fan, we're there having each other's back. And I just don't know of a organization or a fellowship that does it like this. They may be out there, but
yeah, and we're all growing up. We're all maturing. I'll tell you a story about my second home group. Now, this is a bad example. And what it was this particular meeting had been around for many years. It was started in the in the 40s. I mean, it was one of the first meetings in New Jersey, and it was out in the swamp. I never mentioned the name of the home group because it just wouldn't be fair. But it was Myersville. It was a Myersville meeting, and it had a Tuesday night step meeting, and it had a Friday night speaker meeting, and it was all part of the same home group, right? Now there was an individual who had brushed himself up on the service manual, the AA home group, and some of the traditions, and was armed and dangerous with some of this stuff. Now you have to understand that a lot of these are guiding principles, right? But they can be used as weapons.
Sure.
And what happened was this individual was just going Friday nights. He wasn't going Tuesday. And Tuesday is when the officer reports were given. So the treasurer report, the booker's report were given on Tuesdays. Friday, they just wanted to get on with the speaker meeting. They didn't, speakers were coming from different places, and they didn't want to spend 10 minutes on, announcements. They wanted to get into the meeting, which is, I think a good idea.
Yeah.
But this individual took exception that there weren't reports from the trusted servants, and he started calling these business meetings, these group conscience meetings, and they became contentious. And he wasn't getting his way. They weren't going to change the group just for this one guy. So he kept calling these meetings and rallying people, circling the wagons. And what happened was this meeting had about 80 to 100 people at it, right? And it went down to 60, it went down to 40, it went down to 20. And finally I left, and I got another home group. I mean, it just got toxic.
Sure.
Because you weren't talking about spirituality. You were talking about, why is this person fighting this, and why isn't this person doing that, and we can't get this guy to talk to us, and it just like ruined the meeting. So this whole home group, which was a really good home group, was destroyed because somebody wanted to know what was being done with their dollar. And I look back on it, and it's just it's immaturity, and it's ego, and so we're self-will run riot, though we usually don't think so.
Yeah.
And it's prior to individuals having a recovery experience. They're in the middle of a stark raving sober experience, and they're lashing out, and that can happen, but that's pretty rare. I can't give you another example in my 34 years of going to meetings. I can't give you another example that was like that.
Yeah.
But again, we have to see the forest, and yeah, the trees are important, but the forest is important. So unity is the purpose of all this. So if we're fighting about one tree, and and the whole forest is dying, we're on the wrong track. If we're breaking a group apart because of our interpretation of a tradition that's not being followed, the whole purpose of the tradition is for group unity. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's rare that something like that'll happen. You and I have seen it though. We've seen people who refuse to follow the spiritual principle of rotation.
Right.
They want to run the meeting for the next 20 years. We've seen examples like that, but most of them are benign. We survive that kind of stuff as a whole, and I'm glad that we do. There's enough protective guardrails in place.
Yeah.
That this society is not going to have a negative impact. I don't think. Certain groups may, but anyway, all this stuff was Bill was paying so much attention to all this stuff and giving us great guidance, real spiritual, humble guidance.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, I was reflecting as you were talking about some of the king knuckleheads that I've run into, some of the power drivers, as you put it sometimes, and I'm thinking the ones that are still around after all these years, they've matured, they've grown up, they've actually calmed down. You know what I mean? The other ones, they just didn't stick around.
So this individual that broke the group up,
yeah,
I've had him at my wedding. What I mean? We're really close friends. I've run marathons with him.
Oh wow!
You know what I mean?
Wow.
Like he's one of my closest friends today, and
Yeah.
And I could never see him doing that again.
Yeah.
He actually went through the 12 steps and is a completely different person.
You said something once on one of our broadcasts, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, but you were talking about people in positions of service, and we don't have any guarantee that they've had a spiritual awakening as a result of those steps, and now they're in service positions, and then we run into problems because the way I see it, they're trying to operate on a spiritual plane that they're not living in.
So it's the third legacy. Service is our third legacy. It's not our first legacy.
Right.
Okay. If you skip a legacy, you're going to be a god awful service
right
member.
Exactly.
And that's just what I've seen.
Yeah.
There are people who maintain sobriety through massive amount of service, just like there are people who maintain sobriety through massive amount of meeting attendance.
Yeah.
You're missing the whole boat if that's what you're doing.
Right.
Because there's a recovery experience available that you haven't even touched yet. So is there a box you have to check as you become a service member that you've gone through the 12 steps? No. And that can be a problem.
Yeah. You bet. Well, speaking about the third legacy, next week, the title of the article is "What is the Third Legacy?" So we're going to be able to crack that article open next week.
He's kind of told us in a few of the earlier articles, but like Bill, is he elaborates, he further defines as he goes along. So it'll be a great show, I'm sure.
I love when I was working out at the Adult and Teen Challenge facility, and we would do the 12-step workshop, and we would go through the Big Book. And what I loved doing, it was just such a kick for me, was whenever Bill would repeat himself but use different wordage, I would point that out. Mm-hmm. And I would tell the guys, look, you see what he's doing here? He understands that we learn by repetition, but he also understands we're not going to listen to the same words over and over and over again. But what you're going to find throughout this literature is Bill repeats himself constantly, but he says it in different ways. So by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, yeah, I get it.
Bill tells you what he's going to tell you, then he tells you, and then he tells you what he told you.
Yeah.
Over and over and
Yep.
over again.
Yeah.
And he also uses different words because
Yep.
as he once told people, good writing, you don't repeat the same adjective or the same verb over and over and over again in the same paragraph. You try to use some diversity of language. That's just good writing.
Yeah. And he was, he really was a much better writer than he was a speaker. Wouldn't you agree?
His writing is seminal. You
Yeah.
know, his speaking. Listen, I can still listen to a Bill Wilson talk, but he's no Tony Robbins. You know
Right.
what I mean?
All right, listeners. We are so glad that you've joined us. Remember, you can catch up on all of these episodes, but I'm not going to tell you how. You got to listen to the closing music and follow the directions there. It'll give you instructions on how you can catch up on all of these shows. We're still not quite halfway through. So we've got a ways to go, and we're sure having fun with it. So, Chris, thank you so much. Listeners, God be with you until our next broadcast. This is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we are wishing God's perfect serenity for you. Bye-bye now. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.